Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with Sydney Timmins and
Becky Lawrence.
And today we are going to be discussing A Beginner's Guide to Being Mental, an A to Z from Anxiety to Zero Given by Natasha, Devon, MBE.
Amazon gives it 4.8 stars with 15 reviews, and Goodreads gives it 4.5 stars with 14 ratings and 9 reviews. I gave this 5 stars.
I did the same.
And I'm just going to read the blurb to you. So, am I normal? What is an anxiety disorder? Does therapy work? These are just a few of the questions Natasha Devon is asked as she travels the UK campaigning for better mental health awareness and provision. Here, Natasha calls upon the experts in their field of psychology, neuroscience and anthropology to debunk and demystify the full spectrum of mental health, from A, anxiety, to Z, zero given, or the art of having high self-esteem, via everything from body image to gender to differentiating sadness from depression. Statistically, 1 in 3 of us will experience symptoms of a mental health illness during our lifetimes. Yet all of us have a brain, and so we all have mental health, regardless of age, sexuality, race or background. The past few years have seen an explosion in awareness, yet it seems that there is still widespread confusion. A Beginner's Guide to Being Mental is for anyone who wants to have this essential conversation, written as only Natasha, with her combination of expertise, personal experience and humour, knows how.
So I would like to start by saying that this is probably the book that I wish I had written and not Natasha. So I'm hoping that is...
That's a compliment.
Yeah, I'm hoping that is taken as a compliment because I really did enjoy it. And she definitely does bring the funny during the book, which makes it much more palatable than something that is probably more textbook.
Yeah, it's much more scientific. It's got a lot of explanation in there about how the brain works and how our bodies work, and it uses explanations of dopamine and things like that. And so it definitely is something that could have been quite dry. I definitely laughed out loud a few times.
And because we're dealing with a book that goes from A to Z of everything mental health, we have decided, because we can't cover everything in this podcast...
And we've done a lot of podcasts that cover a lot of the bits.
Becky came up with this fantastic idea to split the book in half. I did the first half, she did the second half, and from that half to pick 3 letters out of the 26 in the alphabet.
We read the whole book, but we just decided we would have half to pick from. So I had the second half. So you went first.
I did. But it also means that it saved arguments. However, actually, when I sat down to do this, trying to figure out which 3 I was going to pick out was the most stress-inducing thing I have ever done.
Yeah, and if you'll see our Twitter post for the last couple of days before recording...
It's all Becky's fault, is all I can say.
It has been difficult. And then there were times when we were like, well, actually, this other letter will fit in with that one, so we can do 2 of those in that one letter. And yeah, it was quite stressful. But we did narrow it down.
Eventually. It took us a while.
So do you want to go with, you've picked?
I have picked C, which is for capitalism, G for GPs, and H for happiness. Becky has chosen
R for recovery, W for weeds and other non-prescription drugs, and then X, which is the X chromosome, which discusses gender and especially men.
So I think we should jump right into our discussion of C for capitalism. So this particular chapter is really all about the environment that we live in and the nature of capitalism in relation to people's mental health.
Yeah, and the sort of cultural aspects of how that affects mental health.
Yeah, exactly. So we are bombarded with all these different messages every single day. And in some ways, the issue that Natasha is picking out, which I completely agree with and can definitely see where she's coming from, is the fact that companies and businesses are making us feel constantly in a state of anxiety because otherwise we wouldn't then be good consumers because we wouldn't buy their products. So we need to feel an anxiety, fear, shame, guilt associated with needing to then buy those products to make us fit in with the rest of society.
Yeah.
And because of that, and because we are really, in some ways, we get those messages all the time. And from when we are really young.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know that my nieces who are very little actually want to buy things all the time and
Jojo Bows.
Yeah, and don't see the appreciation of when they do actually get it, because nothing is enough. So even if you say, right, you've only got this much to spend, they want to spend more. They want this, they want this,
the same
they
with
want
my
this.
nephews.
Yeah, and we're taught that we need more stuff, and stuff is what's going to make us happy. And I even talk at work about how children are brought up to believe that the more money you earn, the more successful you are. When actually, happiness doesn't actually come necessarily from that. And we'll talk more about that when we do the happiness chapter as well, which links closely together.
Yeah, and I do think that capitalism also has another link associated with food. And to be fair, I think most of these chapters are interrelated. I do like the way that she has split them into the different letters, because it makes it, I don't know, a bit more digestible because it is in bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
And I don't know necessarily how you would be able to do it a different way.
Yeah, I think it becomes overwhelming otherwise. And I think this is why Natasha wrote this book, because the whole idea of mental health, if you don't know anything, is a minefield and there's so much. But if you break it down into chunks, it does become easier, like you said. And I like the idea of how she's done it into sort of an A to Z. But they do link, you're right.
Yeah.
So we will have a lot of crossover.
Yeah, so this chapter also deals with stereotypes. It is related to capitalism because, again, we have all of these messages about what different people are like, and also in terms of what is identified as the perfect body.
Yeah, and not just the perfect body, but also the perfect person. So, you know, you have to be competitive in your field, whatever you go into. You have to be perfect, and you have to be sporty, and you have to be all these things that fit different categories of life. And I think that adds pressure to a person because
I don't ever meet those.
No.
Unfortunately.
And this is the thing, as I remember as a child, my brother was really sporty. He's trained as a PE teacher and I wasn't. And there was this kind of failure that I felt because I wasn't sporty.
Yeah. And they've also done these interesting studies, haven't they? Where they've taken a particular person and asked different countries to Photoshop them into their ideal image. And you can see in each instance in different countries, there are different ideals of what beauty is.
Yeah.
And I think that's really telling because, again, it just shows you that we are influenced by our culture and the messages that we are receiving.
And sometimes this can be completely unachievable because the ideal beauty that country or culture or group of people think that is amazing could be something that you can't physically change. So it could be you don't have the asymmetrical face, you don't have the perfect tan skin or whatever it is that the beauty is. For example, I am very pale.
So am I.
Yeah.
We're equally as pale as each other, to be fair.
And I don't tan, I tea stain. There is a slight amount of freckling and slight...
She's darker than me at the moment because she's been sat outside in the sunshine. I'm just comparing.
Yeah, but compared to my sister-in-law who's Italian, I've got no competition whatsoever.
Have you, really?
Yeah. And yet the ideal is to have tanned, which is meant to mean you have healthy skin.
And back in the 80s, you were born in the wrong era. Becky has the most amazing amount of hair that anyone could possibly have. And whenever we go to the hairdressers, she has to have it all thinned out, because that is what is more ideal now.
Yeah.
But in the 80s, you could have got away with giant hair, whereas I, on the other hand, who has really fine, almost non-existent hair in some respects...
It's not as bad as she makes it out to be.
I feel like it's non-existent. But in comparison, I would have been really horrific and not able to achieve...
You would have had to have got a perm.
I did get a perm. Don't laugh at me. It's not funny. Yeah, I know. I had several perms. Yeah, leave me alone. My mum had a perm recently.
Yeah, they're coming back. But I could never get a perm because I would look like Monica in Friends when she goes on holiday and that frizz happens.
Or Bridget Jones when she's been in the car with...
Colin Firth or Hugh Grant.
And it just goes... poof.
Yeah, I could never own a soft top car for that very reason. Yeah, I have crazy amount of hair. Like, I go to the hairdressers and people literally go... I go, it's really thick. And they go, yeah. And then they go, oh, yeah, no, you really do have the ultimate thick hair.
Well, when they finish, it's a case of, it's not really that she's cut anything off the length. It's purely just
thinning it out. She takes like an inch off every time, but she'll take a lot more off when she thins it than she ever does when she trims it.
Which is more hair than I actually have on my head currently.
It's amazing. But so I can never achieve that ideal of the long, glamorous hair
sleek
look. Yeah.
With straight.
It goes frizzy and it's too big and all that kind of stuff. I also can't tan like I'm meant to, as these models and everything should have nicely tanned skin. But
I
you know
have
what?
also got rolls on my rolls.
Yeah.
So we're not particularly slim people.
No.
And to be fair, I think I probably was like these size zeros when I was like 5 or something. I'm never going to achieve that in a million years. And that pressure is also going to impact, or it has impacted, the way that I eat and have a relationship with food because of the messages that I'm being sent. I mean, I've had my grandma tell me that I'm fat and things like that. And as a result, I stop eating. And then I binge eat. So, yeah, it causes all of these additional social problems.
Well, I know that I've hated my hair for so long.
I love your hair.
Because of the way it is, because it could never be what the ideal should be. So I spend a lot of money. It is about 170, 180 pounds each
time, 6 weeks.
6 to 8 weeks to have my hair done. And that feeds into the capitalist element that actually I have to pay someone to reach the ideal of what my hair should be like. And there's lots of people that pay to get tans and nails done and
eyebrow waxes, eyelash tints.
And if that's what you want to make you happy, then that's great. But if you're doing it to meet an ideal, then that's where we're moving over into this capitalist society causing mental health issues.
And yeah, whoever invented waxing should be got rid of now, because that is one of the most evilest things ever on the entire planet.
And Natasha writes in her book that at present, the well-being, self-esteem of the population is ranked lower than the pursuit of profit in society's list of priorities. And I think that's what sums up what we've been saying. The well-being of a person is ranked lower than the economy
of getting as much
of the
money
country.
As possible.
Yeah. And kids at school think that money is what makes you successful. And I hate that. I really fight against that in my classroom. And I turn around and say to them, do you think I put less effort in than a millionaire?
No.
And the kids often go, well, no, you probably work harder because they've probably got other people to do stuff for them. And I'm like, well, I am never, ever going to be a millionaire because I chose to be a teacher. And
unless you win the lottery.
But I don't play, which makes it difficult. But the kids equate money with success. But actually, I have overcome so much in my life to get to where I am. I am happy and content with my life. Shouldn't that be success?
I think so.
And that's where I think we're trying to teach children wrong, because like you said, it comes from a young age. We are taught, and we do live in one of the southern counties, and the home counties are there's a lot of money. And
in certain areas, there is awful amounts of money that you look at their houses and you go, wow.
I mean, these kids, some of their bedrooms are probably bigger than my entire house.
That is true. Your house is tiny.
But lovely.
It is.
And so it is this aspect of the kids are brought up, where we are especially, in these areas where wealth is seen as so important. And we are in a conservative borough as well. And that means that most of the people are voting for the Conservatives, and the Conservatives are capitalists at heart. They're not liberals, and there are liberal aspects in that, you know, they do support the NHS, but it's much more of a verbal tick-boxing service, and behind the scenes, and it's becoming more and more prevalent that they are actually bleeding the money out of those services that are more liberal.
So that was a political rant by Becky Lauren.
Sorry.
At the end of each chapter, what Natasha does is she kind of gives you an idea or some tips about how to ensure that your well-being is maintained, even though you are faced with these things. So she entitles it
Protecting Your Mental Health in a Capitalist World.
And so she gives you 2 ideas or 2 steps. Step 1 is to ensure that you are aware, so increase your awareness.
So this is things like analysing adverts, questioning stereotypes, questioning the way that we talk about gender, the way we talk about different issues, and being more aware of other people's concerns around it, and sort of educating yourself really, but also questioning how other people are presenting that information to you. She even talks about how charities, they all have an agenda.
Well, they need to get money from somewhere, and they achieve that by getting you to give them money, and then they can then take that as a way to show, look, we're getting this much money. And then maybe the government then gives them additional on top of that. So, you can
everyone has an agenda when they're posting on...
We have an agenda.
Yeah.
Listen to our podcast.
Yeah, it is true. Everyone does. But then she does say we are a product of our culture and of our upbringing and of all the things around us. The second step is to change the environment. So using social media to actually change people's perceptions and get them to accept maybe a broader stereotype, a broader cultural acceptance of people's differences. And she gives a really good example of this of Tess Holliday, who is a plus size model, although I hate that term.
Plus size.
She's a model.
Yep.
That's it. She's a model and she's beautiful. And she was able to become a model, though, because she had the social followings behind her to actually, for the companies to actually think it was worth her being a model, which I think is horrible in the way that it is put and the way that that is the case. But unfortunately, it is.
It's the way you've got to do it. And if it's working, I think that's fantastic. It means that we have some kind of ownership back.
Yeah.
Whereas before we would be
power to the people.
All. Yeah, exactly.
It is. It's power to mass population. And it gives a power to people who don't necessarily engage in political arguments. So young people are more into social media. And so reaching out to them on social media and getting their following is actually getting their say into politics without them actually turning up and voting, or campaigning, which often they're not doing.
So if you haven't followed us on Twitter yet, head over to @MHBC_podcast. Becky has her own, which is
@BLawrence85.
And mine is @Sydney_Timmins.
The other thing that you can do to change your environment is look at the laws around advertising, and you can check out the small print as you watch them. So a lot of these advertisements that have false eyelashes, but they're actually trying to say this mascara is amazing. And if you look at the bottom, there is usually an asterisk.
Disclaimer, isn't there?
Yeah. And it does say this model
is wearing false eyelashes. Well, that's not very helpful when I want my eyelashes to look like that without putting false eyelashes on. I mean, seriously.
Yeah. And volumizing hair, which I've never needed, but
I do all the time. I need it. And
then it says the model was wearing hair extensions. I think there was even an example of male shaving, and they'd actually waxed them, and they had a disclaimer at the bottom. Because I love reading the disclaimers because I find them really funny, especially when it says like 96% out of 100 people recommend this product, and you're like, well, 100 isn't really a great population size, is it? When you think of the entire country. So it is really about making sure you read those little bits at the bottom of adverts and understanding that they are trying to sell you a product, so they are going to give you all the best bits. Especially in America when it comes to medicines and things like that. Because in America, the system is so different. It's not like on the NHS where we get given medicines at a prescription price or free, depending if you're exempt. But in America, they're advertising because they want you to take drugs that they want for certain things. So they will make it out as if you need it. So please, please, please be active in seeking out all the information about things.
So that leads us on to our next letter, which is G for GPs. So just in case you are not from the UK, what we have here is GPs, and they work in doctor surgeries, and they're kind of the gatekeepers to all of our health needs, and that includes mental health. So you have to go through a GP, usually. However, this has changed recently, where you can now self-refer for mental health input.
Yeah, you can go on and do online
counselling and online CBT and all those kind of things. But that's really what a GP does. And so Natasha's book talks about what the GP is there for. It then also goes on to talk about some of her bad experiences that she has had with different GPs. And first of all, and the most important thing, is that she does acknowledge that the NHS and the doctors and the staff within the NHS are really working over capacity. They are doing the best that they can with the resources that they have because their funding keeps getting slashed. And
it's about priority.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, mental health isn't considered on the same par as physical health, and therefore the funding for that is dropped because it is less of a priority. And then also when the money from the government is given to local councils and different trusts, they then can use it as they wish. They don't have to use it for what the government gave it to them for. So they might be given money for mental health issues, but actually put it into A&E, for example, because actually that's where they are struggling. And because physical health, you think, well, they give a good example of saying, well, if you have cancer, you might die, therefore you need the help within 2 weeks. But they don't actually understand that, well, with mental health, you might die in 2 weeks because you might take your own life because of the mental health crisis you're having. So it is really important to understand that mental health is as critical as physical health. It just doesn't visually maybe appear that way when you present yourself at A&E.
yeah, I can agree with this sentiment.
And Johnny Benjamin, who is another campaigner and author that we're going to read his book later on, is actually supporting a campaign on the petition.parliament.uk where there's lots of petitions for lots of different things that can go towards actually changing things in the future. And there is a petition about funding facilities for people who feel suicidal so they have somewhere to go. And they're trying to get signatures so that the government will then talk about this and actually be able to raise it as an issue, just as Natasha Devon is doing with her own campaign on the same website at Petitions for Parliament to actually try and get a mental health first aider in every workplace.
And what I should do is I should put the links to both of those into the show notes. So please, 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 if you don't do anything today, like our Twitter and Facebook and all of the social media, please go over and sign the petitions because we think this is extremely important.
Yeah, it is. And being part of the political message, showing MPs that we actually do want change. And like we said, social media and these petitions actually mean that we have a voice. And I think that is really important. I would like to say that her stories about GPs actually resonated with me from what we've both said about our own experiences of GPs. And we are big supporters of the NHS and the work they're doing. However, at the same time, there are occasions when we come out of GP services and think that we have kind of got the raw end of a deal or haven't been listened to properly. And partly that is because of the lack of funding and the lack of services available and time. But I think also there is some GPs who don't prioritise mental health issues and don't listen necessarily to their patients. I often find I'm not taken as seriously as I want to be because, especially when I was first diagnosed with fibromyalgia, because I was young and I must just be wanting pain medication. I can't actually have a serious problem because I'm young. And it's that perception that some GPs have. I mean, I go in and I had a GP recently that I went in for my fibromyalgia and saying I was having issues and wanting a blood test and wanting bits and pieces. And he told me, well, as long as if I took a teaspoon of Manuka honey every day and some zinc tablets, it would cure my fibromyalgia.
Yes, please.
And I did it just to prove that I'm still not cured.
Are you not?
No. And it might work for some people for some reason. And there are a lot of benefits to Manuka honey. There are a lot of benefits to taking zinc, but it's not going to cure long-term chronic illness. And I think the same perception is given to mental health. A lot of people go, well, if you just do this, you'll be all right. And often GPs are handing out medication before they even do anything else. For example, I was signed off before Christmas for anxiety for a couple of weeks. And they didn't offer me medication, but they didn't offer me any therapy either. They just gave me 2 weeks off.
Which didn't really do that much.
It helped.
Well, yeah, but it didn't necessarily look at the underlying reasons associated with why you were in the position you were in at the time. It was...
And I see a private therapist, and so I went to that therapist and got the help to deal with the underlying issues as to why I was at that point of anxiety. However, not everyone has the funding to be able to do that. My therapist cost me £40 a session. I know that Natasha in her book talks about how hers costs her £75 a session. And that isn't a matter of quality.
95.
Yeah, it's about what they're providing and the type of training they've got, the qualifications behind them, but it's what suits you as well. I actually feel very comfortable with my therapist and we get on really well with helping me improve. And she has the really cutest little dog.
So I think also what is quite interesting that Natasha does point out that there are people that may go to the doctor or to the GP and are not necessarily giving the full information or maybe exaggerating their symptoms or also even potentially time wasting at that time. I mean, there's always signs, I don't know if you've noticed in your GP surgery, saying this many people didn't show up for their appointments and that cost this much money and all of those kind of things. And I do understand that because of the strain on the NHS, that this diagnosing in 6 minutes, because that's all they have been given is 6 minutes to diagnose you with something or identify what the problem is, that you're never going to necessarily get what you need from that appointment.
No. But the thing is, I think that's almost slightly missing the point of a GP, because actually a GP should be a gateway to where you do have more time with a specialist that actually gives you the services you need. They're not meant to be the therapist, but they're meant to be the gateway to being referred to a therapist.
But they have to identify that in the first instance.
Yeah.
And again, that probably comes down to mental health awareness from that GP, because the whole point of a GP is that they have this knowledge about everything, but they have a little bit of knowledge about everything rather than a specialist. So, for example, I have to go to a neurologist every 6 months, and you have to go to a rheumatologist for your fibro. So you get sent to the specialist places, but they've got to figure out where you have to go in the first instance. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And actually, Natasha talks about a lot of sometimes she gets flu symptoms for a few days, and it definitely looks like flu. But afterwards, when she's looked back and she's analysed why it happened,
it's associated with her anxiety.
Yeah. And I definitely think that's the case. There's some days when I think I'm coming down with something when actually it's something else going on. So I completely relate to that. And that must be really hard for GPs, because how do you then distinguish that? And what do you then treat? Do you treat the flu because that's what it's appearing as? Or how do you, if the person doesn't even recognise it, how do you recognise that it's anxiety?
I also think that it's important to understand that if you are going to your GP with a concern about your mental health, you haven't necessarily just gone on a whim. There is probably something that is really causing you issues and needs to be addressed. So, for example, Natasha talks about how she went to her university GP and said, I think I have a problem with food, while she is in the midst of suffering with bulimia. And the first thing the doctor asks her to do is to get on the scales, looks at her, goes, you're a healthy weight, there's nothing wrong with you, go away.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, she then didn't get the help that she needed.
For another 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. To a lot later, which is just ridiculous, because she could have been helped in the meantime, and she wouldn't have got to the point she was.
I think this is the other issue, is when you go to your GP to ask for help, you've already plucked up so much courage, you've already got to a point of crisis. And then after you go to the GP, and if they do recognise, yes, you've got a mental health issue going on, we're going to refer you, actually the referrals are taking anywhere between sort of 8 weeks to 2 years, I've heard, of people waiting to actually see somebody to help them. And yet when they've gone to their GP, they're at a crisis point. So by the time they then get the therapy, they're not in a place to be able to actually deal with the issue, because they're almost beyond it, if that makes sense. So there is a real issue with GP services, and that's another campaign that's going around social media at the moment, that actually more people are talking about mental health, and that is fantastic.
But it's not saying that as a result of people talking about it more, that now means that people are being, like, the associated increase is purely because people are now talking about it. It's just because these people are suffering. Yeah. And I'm hitting Becky. I don't know why I'm hitting her, but I'm hitting her.
They know that they know that this is out there, and there's actually a review going on about the services for mental health. But one MP that was involved, Natasha mentioned when we saw her talk, that actually one MP turned around and said, well, the reason that there is a more demand is because of the raise in awareness, and actually we should stop the awareness raising.
Yeah, stop talking about it, people.
No. You need to increase the services, because actually people who need help. And that's the problem that we've got at the moment, that actually the services aren't there for the people who are asking for help. I mean, there are people going to A&E and being turned away, even though they're saying they're suicidal. And that's a crime. That is criminal. And I'm not blaming the NHS, because, like we've said, there is a much bigger issue of funding. I actually think the problem is the government needs to put more funding in, and they need to ring fence the funding that is there for mental health issues and provide more services. And this is one of the things that Natasha and Johnny are both campaigning for, and we are joining in that campaign on Twitter, and you'll see us often posting and reposting and trying to get involved. And I hope you do too.
The other important thing that Natasha identifies and discusses is the fact that doctors aren't immune from mental health issues themselves.
No.
And as a result of this increased pressure that is being placed on them, doctors are leaving the profession at the highest level they have been for a long time. Yeah. And she has interviewed one doctor who tells her about his experience and why he decided he had to leave the NHS. And I won't go into too much detail, but we need to remember that these people are people and do have issues themselves.
And he even said that if he was allowed to have 2 weeks off to recoup and then come back to it, he probably still would be a GP, but that isn't the way it works. So
there isn't the capacity for that. There isn't the money for that.
So you end up just leaving. And I think that means that we're losing some potentially very good GPs, because also if a GP does suffer with mental health illness, they usually are more relatable to those that have it themselves. which then increases their ability to be a GP effectively. But they need support.
Yeah.
Every psychologist actually has a therapist they talk to and to offload. And I know Natasha says for all professions where you are dealing with people, you actually do need that. And I know teachers, I always think that teachers need somewhere to go to offload the things that they deal with.
I mean, I spoke to the secret psychiatrist about this particular topic because she is going back into forensics, which is one of the most difficult, I think. To be fair, the whole of psychiatry, all psychologists, they have a tough rap.
Yeah.
With basically having to sit and
deal with people's problems every day.
Exactly. And imagine if you were going into a situation where you had to treat someone who had committed some crime against children, or they've done something such as rape or sexual assault, or all of those kind of things. How do you then, because you're going to hear some awful things come out of these people, you then need to also look after your own mental health.
Yeah.
And she discusses what they do in this particular situation. So I won't spoil it. You can hear that in the upcoming episodes. But I think that's really important, that they also need to look after themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, to end that chapter, Natasha talks about the tips that she would give people about going to their GP about their mental health.
Yeah, so she says that every practice should have an in-house specialist GP in mental health, so specifically asked to see that GP.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. Try and take a friend or a family member to support you, because sometimes you might not be able to get your words out, you might not be able to articulate because of your mental state, and therefore someone there, but also just somewhere there for a presence that will support you. And if that GP isn't being supportive of you, you've got somebody else to fight your corner.
Yep, and I would definitely support that. So when I went to the GP because I was thinking about suicide, I had my husband with me, so Lawrence came along and he was able to articulate the things that I couldn't, because I just sat there kind of like a grumpy teenager, really. I shouldn't say that, really,
no,
but I was just this grumpy kind of... That was a stereotype. Sorry.
Also, then don't take your GP's word as gospel. Use them to guide you, but if you want a second opinion, ask for a second opinion. Remember that GPs are overworked, that they are stressed out, that they are victims of the system as well, so they might not be in the position or the place to hear you at that time, and have a little consideration for that. And then finally, follow charities and use them as you need, because there are many mental health charities out there with lots of really amazing advice.
Definitely. So I think we will leave the book discussion there for this particular episode. So that was letters C and G. In our next episode, we will probably, hopefully, fingers crossed, cover letters H, R, W and X. So until next time, it's okay to not be okay.
And if you're not okay, talk.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you need additional help with your mental health, please contact the Samaritans on 116 123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next episode will be the second half on An A to Z, From Anxiety to Zero Given by Natasha Devon, MBE. Our next book will be A Tiny Piece of Something Greater by Jude Sierra by Natasha Devon, MBE. If you'd like to find out more about the MHBC podcast, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We really hope that you enjoy this podcast, and we would like to hear what you think. Please head over to Twitter and follow us at MHBC_podcast, or head over to Facebook and follow our Facebook page, which is Mental Health Book Club. If you would like to show your support further, please share us with your family and friends, and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts.